Eternal Guards have been Sea of Thieves for almost 8 months, but I didn't realize how broken they were until Custom Seas was released. That finally let me test how they spawn, how to farm them as fast as possible, and even how to predict where they appear before you even step foot on an island. These discoveries helped me finish first in the July Emissary Ledger for Gold Hoarders, Order of Souls, and Hunter's Call, and I don't know if that's ever been done before for 3 companies. I was on pace for Merchant 2, but an exploit showed up right at the end of the month, right before a double XP weekend, and it completely destroyed the leaderboard, so I kind of stopped grinding for Merchants, and I ended up at 33rd. Before the exploit came out, I was in second, was about to pass my friend who was in first, but then all these people came out of nowhere and passed me just because they were exploiting. Anyway, across the 19 days that I did play this month, I earned 200 million emissary value and 70 million gold, almost entirely solo. So in this video, I'm going to show you everything that I learned from how guard spawns actually work to the fastest routes, and like I said, a trick that lets you tell whether an island has a guard or not without even touching it. First, let's answer the obvious question: are Eternal Guards even worth doing? Every guard drops a vault key. The vault itself contains 88,500 gold consistently before your emissary bonus. And if you open both the ashen key rooms inside the vault, that jumps to 152,500 gold. So if you're able to sell everything with a 2.5x multiplier, either by doing reapers or by cycling through emissaries, that becomes over 381,000 gold per vault. So if you're able to do 2 vaults per hour, then you could be making over 700,000 gold. 2 vaults per hour is a pretty good goal if you're trying to be efficient as a solo player. These vaults give loot for Gold Hoarders, Order of Souls, Merchant, and Hunter's Call, so it's great for whatever company that you're trying to level up. The main vault has a couple gems, but the side vaults have a lot more, so opening those gives you a lot of flexibility to level up a specific company more than others if you so choose. Next, we need to know how to actually find the Eternal Guards. If you go to Rare Thieves interactive map and filter by Eternal Guards, you can see where they possibly could spawn. Each region has about 3 to 4 possible guard islands. However, when a server starts, there are islands that are more likely than others to have guards at them. I checked 7 fresh servers on Custom Seas. I know it's not a huge sample size, but the pattern was pretty consistent. 6 out of the 7 times, I had 3 guards spawn in the Roar, and 3 on the mainland. The other time, I had only 2 spawn in the Roar, but then 4 on the mainland, meaning there's always 6 guards per server. Here are the exact values of each island if you're curious on which ones I had spawn more often than others. This shows that while the Roar is the most populated area, the Wilds has almost as many at the start of a server. So if you're looking for a medium-sized route trying to get 5 to 6 Eternal Guards, you should go through the Wilds and the Roar, checking Old Faithful Isle, Shipwreck Bay, Kraken's Fall, Fetcher's Rest, Ruby's Fall, and Ashen Reaches. I rarely saw any ever spawn in on Flintlock, as well as the Sunken Grove, but you can check them if you'd like. Now, here's probably the most useful trick in the entire video. You can figure out whether an island has an Eternal Guard without ever setting foot on it, but the method is kind of complicated. We're going to be using quests to figure out where the guards are. The first thing we need to know is how the quest system actually works, because we're going to be using them to narrow down which islands do and which islands do not have guards. So we want to choose a quest that takes us to a large island, since guards can't spawn on any of the small islands. A quest will try to give you the closest island to you, except under a few circumstances. It will not give you the closest island if you are about within the banner range of the island, you had just completed a quest there, except for a couple cases. Or most importantly, if there is an Eternal Guard there. So if you're voting for a quest and it should give you a specific island, but it doesn't, then that means there is a guard there. Whatever island it does give you for the quest will not have a guard at that island. So we can use this when approaching an island to see if we should skip even looking at it, or if it's worth stopping at. Some islands, like Wanderer's Refuge, you have to check the entire island from top to bottom just to see if there's a guard there normally. Using this method, you can skip all that. So if you're trying to do this as an example, if you're sailing from Kraken's Fall out into the Roar and Fetcher's Rest is your closest island, Then you can put an Ashen Gold Hoarder quest down, and it should give you Fetcher's Rest. Since it is the closest island, you are far enough away and haven't done a quest there. If it gives you Flintlock Peninsula instead, then that means there is a guard at Fetcher's, and it's avoiding that location to give out quests. Another example, you could use this if you just finished a guard at Ashen Reaches, and you want to see if it's worth going over to Devil's Ridge for another key. If you then vote for a regular Large Island Gold Hoarder quest, then it should give you Devil's Ridge. But again, if it doesn't, if it gives you Thieves Haven instead, then there is a guard there, and it's worth sailing over. So far, we've just been talking about voting for Sail To quests instead of quests that you dive to, since you don't want to leave the server when you have keys on board. But dive quests also have some value as well. When you vote for a dive quest, it completes the same checks on if there is an Eternal Guard on the island or not, even though it's going to switch you to a different server. So you can basically check all of the roar from anywhere on the server as long as you don't actually end up diving. So, Parkine Island, keep voting up Ashen Reaper quests. You want to do these instead of the Gold Hoarder ones in this case because the Reaper quests and the Eternal Guard don't spawn on Devil's Thirst, so you can count that out. And if you do this and you keep getting one island, then that means there are guards on all the other large islands. So for example, the most common one you would get is Flintlock Peninsula. That means Fetcher's Rest, Ruby's Fall, and Ashen Reaches all have a guard. If you keep getting Flintlock and Rubies, then there are guards at the other two. This isn't 100% foolproof because RNG could prevent you from getting one of the islands, and sometimes it keeps giving you the same island over and over anyway. So I usually cycle through a couple different kinds of quests that seems to fix it. But this allows you to do some checks on islands that are further away from you. Once you do this enough, you can get a good idea of where the guards are going to be and if it's worth sailing out into the roar to complete them. You can do this on the mainland too, but since there are so many more islands, it's pretty difficult to narrow down exactly which ones don't have guards and which ones just haven't showed up just based on RNG. Once you do finish the guard, you might be wondering, where's the next one going to spawn, or do more guards even spawn at all? The answer is, there will always be 6 guards on a server. It was a little hard for me to tell if they spawn immediately, or if the next one will spawn once the sarcophagus goes away after about 4 minutes, but pretty soon after. The next one will usually spawn about as far away as possible. I haven't tested enough to see if there's an exact way to predict where it's going to spawn, but for the most part, if you complete a guard in the roar, it will likely spawn in the western half of the map. So it's not worth it to keep sailing back and forth between all of the roar islands once you've cleared them out, because they've probably moved somewhere else. In my testing, I completed Ashen Reaches and one spawned on Wanderer's Refuge. Then I finished one at Ruby's Fall. The next one spawned at Sharkbite Cove. Then I finished one at Fetcher's Rest, and it gave a new one on Lone Cove. Then I finished one at Kraken's Fall, and the next one spawned on Mermaid's Hideaway. So if you wanted to stack a lot of keys, I'd start at Ashen Reaches, sail north through the roar, then go through the wilds, and keep circling around the map counterclockwise, checking all of the islands that are marked on Rare Thief. Whenever I did this, I was usually able to get about 8 keys at a minimum and 11 keys at most per lap of the server. I honestly wouldn't recommend stacking much more than that because while it honestly doesn't take too long to get the keys, it takes just as long for the next step of the process. So now that we know how to find guards efficiently, what is the best way to actually kill the guards? This isn't that big of a time save, but the data I found while looking at was pretty interesting, so I wanted to share it, and there are some misconceptions in the community about this. The results might not be exactly what you think, and surprisingly, the best weapon for this depends on the crew size. To test the damage of all the different weapons, you can go into a custom siege session, spawn in a guard, turn on scoring with 1 damage equals 1 point, and try this for yourselves. Most people think that throwing knives are the way to go, since they have the highest default DPS, and are the best way to kill things like Ashen Lords and Skeleton Lords. But the guards have a unique damage multiplier to them. Each guard has 8,000 HP, compared to 4,000 for the Ghost of Greymarrow and 12,000 for Ashen Lords. But they actually take a little bit longer because they're constantly phasing in and out. For damage scaling, you'd expect your weapons to do 4 times the damage when you are solo. That way you can still complete the guard in the same amount of time. This is true for the Cutlass, Flintlock, Eye of Reach, and the Double Barrel Pistol. but it is not the case for the blowpipe, throwing knife, or blunderbuss. A throwing knife normally does 65 damage, so you'd expect to do 260 damage against a guard when you're playing solo. Instead, it only deals 97 damage, just 37% of the expected damage. Just for reference, a single sword swing as a solo player does 100 damage, more than a throwing knife. The blowpipe is a similar story at 29% for the explosive darts. I wasn't able to test the poison damage or the fire tick damage from the blowpipe because they only give you points for your score with the initial impact or explosion from the dart, but in testing, it did take more than 12 minutes to kill a guard solo with poison darts, so they're pretty bad. The blunder is a bit better at 75% of the damage that you'd expect as a solo, meaning it's doing 270 damage per shot or 3 times its default value of 90. This isn't that great when considering most of the other weapons are doing 4 times their value. However, these percentages change depending on how many people are in your crew. Most of the weapons end up doing their default damage as a galleon, but the blunderbuss actually does more damage for some reason. Again, a blunder normally does 90 damage per shot, but if you're on a galleon fighting internal guard, they will do 130 damage, making them the best regular weapon to use on any crew size other than if you're solo. The sword ends up being the best weapon as a solo due to its high DPS and not being nerfed like the throwing knife, and then it's followed behind by the flintlock. The combo I normally ended up using was either an Eye of Reach or double barrel pistol instead of the flintlock. That way I could have one large burst shot and then switch over to a cutlass once I'm close enough to keep adding on that damage. While on larger crews, I'd recommend the blunder and either sword or throwing knife. Even on galleon, the throwing knife doesn't do as much damage as you would expect, but at this point it's scaled up enough where it's pretty decent just because of its fast fire rate. So the throwing knife would be useful for range damage in this case and dealing with any keg skeletons that spawn, but the sword could be good for dealing with spawned in skeletons, especially since these skeletons only take 2 swipes to kill instead of the typical 3. Another interesting thing to note is that tridents actually have a lower DPS than most weapons if you're a solo player, but similar to throwing knives, they get better the more players you have using them. The regular tridents do lose a little bit of damage as your crew size grows, but not by much. The trident of the banished, however, doesn't lose any damage based on your crew size, making it the fastest option if you can have 4 people using them and specifically using the medium-sized bubble. A few other tips for the fight is that you can actually crouch to avoid the spears that are thrown by the Eternal Guard. This is really useful because those do a ton of damage, and every once in a while you will get hit while crouching, but it's not very often. So it's definitely your best option if you don't have any cover nearby. I'd also recommend keeping a bucket of water with you at all times, so that way if you do get hit with an explosive dart, you can dump it on yourself. If you're solo and using a sword or getting up close with a blunder, you're going to be getting hit a lot more often. So if you want it to just take a couple more minutes, it's worth using some ranged weapons, saving some food, but if you're trying to kill as fast as possible, that's how I do it. I time myself doing this whole method to give you some actual data on how long a run might take, and what you can expect as a reward from doing it. Keep in mind, I was working towards hitting rank 1 on all emissaries, so I spent extra time organizing the loot and stopping at the outpost multiple times to sell each company individually at grade 5 as much as possible. Organizing the loot took a surprisingly long amount of time because you end up with 10 chests, and every single one of them has 3 items for 3 different trading companies. So I had to sort all through those while I was selling from one vault to the next, and most times I wasn't able to complete it in time. So I had to park my ship, keep organizing the loot before I could go down and move more loot. So this part is a lot better if you have multiple people. Another thing to note is that if you have a bunch of keys, you can just keep going back and forth between the 2 southern vaults. They will respawn and allow you to open the next one by the time you've gathered loot from the other one. So if you don't want to be like me and organize all your loot and all that, I think the best method would just be to raise whatever faction you're trying to level up the most, or you can even raise a guild emissary if you're solo. That way you don't have to organize the loot and you can sell everything for a multiplier even if it's a little bit less than the 2.5x. If you do have a larger crew, then it's probably fine to have one person organize all of the loot and then cycle through the emissaries to get as much of the loot sold for that maximum multiplier as possible. Then you can just sell the leftovers at the end for their base value. Either that, or if you want to make a trip all the way out to Reaper's Hideout and sell everything there, it might not be too bad if you have a galleon crew, but I probably wouldn't recommend that for anything less, just due to the amount of items that you end up getting. Anyway, it took me just under an hour to collect 5 guard keys from Shipwreck Bay, Kraken's Fall, Fetcher's Rest, Ruby's Fall, and Ashen Reaches. I also confirmed that there weren't guards at Old Faithful Isle or Devil's Ridge using the quest trick. Then I spent 19 minutes resetting Ashen Reaches until I had 10 Ashen Keys. I already had 2 from captains I had found earlier, and then I got 8 from the 19 minutes of doing this. This method is best performed solo, and all you have to do is park near where a captain would spawn, and I can show you a couple locations that they do on different islands here. Then you can shoot out of your cannon, take your first mermaid, and then when you come back, the island is reset. So the PvE elements on the island can respawn. For the most part, guards don't respawn this way, but captains will. You won't get a captain every time, and half the time it's going to be the regular captains. But if you're doing this on a large island, then you can get the Ashen captains, which will drop the Ashen keys. This is the closest thing to an exploit in this video. I don't really consider it one since you're just using the basic game mechanics, but if it's something you don't want to do, I understand, and I still believe doing guards without this step is probably worth it. You just won't get the flexibility of all the gems and quite as much gold per hour. You can do this with more crewmates, but they either have to be far away from your ship or you guys all have to shoot out at the same time and take the mermaid at the same time. So I could see there being a method where you have people rowing around in rowboats collecting the guard keys while one person's resetting islands for Ashen keys. Anyway, once I was done with that, then I spent another hour grabbing the loot, organizing it, cycling through the emissaries, and selling everything. If you have 2 Ashen keys, each vault will get you to grade 5 with whatever company you choose. So I just grab all the loot until I had 4 keys left. So in this case, after the first one, then I go raise whatever emissary I wanted to do first, grab all of the loot, organize it, sell the loot for that company, lower the emissary, raise the next one, and keep going through all 4 emissaries. I would also keep all of the gems for the last company to sell them there, but you can sell them along the way as well if you would like to spread them out. In total, including diving, sail time, and sell time, because most creators don't include those, it took me 2.5 hours and I earned 1.7 million gold, or around 680,000 gold per hour as a solo player. So that's about it. Tell me what you guys thought. I hope you learned something new, because I sure did while going through this whole process. If you like Sea of Thieves and videos that show actual data about the game and aren't just trying to clickbait you with earn 900,000 gold per hour with this one method, then subscribe. I only post when I actually have something that is interesting for me to go over, instead of just trying to pump out videos as often as possible for the most amount of views. And I hope you guys can see that. My next video is ranking basically every single method of leveling up for every single company. So if you want to see that, feel free to subscribe. But that's about it. Peace out.